Wait a second. All right. Okay. Well, what I wanted to go into today. So anyone who was at May Camp saw all these slides, but it's going to be good for us to go through, dive into. I'm going to point out a few things that I saw that I thought was very informative and different spots that you can go through. This is all for you to go grab and use any of these slides, also any presentation you want. But what we're going into is basically Gary Keller's vision speech, right? So all of this is the data nationwide of what information was out there. And then I'm going to plug in a few things that I thought were really fascinating that they mentioned as well, especially with the big theme around social media. It was a huge theme at Family Reunion, and those kind of things. So the vision speech. Ultimately, and I'm going to focus, of course, I took out all the slides from Canada, so this is only going to be here. But it was really interesting going in to see what's been happening and what predictions they have and all of that. So the first one, and this is a slide that he said you should use, not this one, one of the next ones, but this is a slide for us to look at. Because what I think is really fascinating is basically now we've had 3 years in a row that we sold 4.1 million deals, right? So if you look at that, then that is gonna be right. We've had basically the same-ish spot for 3 years in a row now. It hasn't changed. If you go hustle, we've all closed deals. It's fun because our brokerage grew by, I'll have to go pull it back up, but I think it was 86%. We did 86% more deals as a brokerage. So way to go. You guys are closing deals. You guys are getting out there. You're hustling. You're doing stuff. So that's the fun part. This right here doesn't mean woe is me. Like Gary Keller was being funny, of course, and was saying, so stop crying. He said it multiple times up on stage. He's like, but ultimately there are deals happening, and we just need to make sure that we're putting ourselves in the right spot to go close them, right? He does project that probably closer to the end of this year is when we're going to get a little bit more deals. He thinks it's going to be pretty flat line, still similar to what we've been dealing with, but probably end of quarter 3, quarter 4, we're going to see a slight change and spike in a few more deals closing, right? Which is fascinating. That's just their projections. Of course, it's always interesting to see. I want to say like a year ago, last time, even 25 was supposed to be 4.2 was kind of their guess. So it's always interesting to see where and what does this look like. Of course, looking through historical data and what's going on. But one thing he mentioned was if you look at any of these times when it was, a lower point, and you look in the data, it was usually about 3 to 4 years is where the bottom sits before it starts going back up. And that's kind of where he was going. I'm going to skip some slides. That's where he was going on this one. So if you look kind of an aspect of, okay, where, what, and how, kind of longevity-wise, he said that this is probably should be one of your slides that you use all the time. Would you move that little microphone bar somewhere else so they can see that? Because I want to say it 7% above, but thank you. And then you have to click again for me so I can, thanks. All right, but it's 7.4% above, right? So when you look at this, he was going through and saying, hey, the biggest problem with humankind is that we only have about a 10-year window of what's in our memory bank, right? So if you go and have a conversation with any buyer or any seller, they're really only remembering until this part, which has always been going up pretty fast kind of a thing. And the same thing with interest rates when I get to that slide. So when you're having this conversation of what it looks like and where it's at, having that story about what does history tell you and where's it at. His whole thing was, okay, what happens with the real estate market over time? It goes up, right? He said, okay, his whole story was when he started in real estate, it was 18% interest rates, and prices were at this point, and all of that stuff. And he's like, people thought it was going to be end of the world. Prices were not going to go up any higher, and there's no way that it could have ever gone up higher. Sounds familiar, right? Because that's what I feel like a lot of buyers will say right now is they're like, there's no way. It's not going to go any higher, right? The reality
It's funny is I've got buyers that are thinking it's doom and gloom and that we're gonna be sunk down below with 08, 09, and 10 numbers. I'm like, I don't think.
Right.
So it was interesting that Gary Keller is saying it's gonna go higher than drop.
Yeah.
But other people are saying because they're looking ahead or whatever.
Correct. And that's where one of the points, and that this will help with that, is when Gary Keller was up on stage talking, he's like, this 4% trend line is very much just kind of been where nationwide where things have been at. So he said, okay, even if we have 2 or 3 more years where instead of hitting, higher growth, if we're around 2 or 3% growth, we're going to close that back to being back with the trend line. And he said that's a very reasonable thing. And then Jay Papasan on stage said, yeah, like if you look on average, even with 4% growth, like over every 10 years, you basically double your value of your house. So the thing is, it's hard to say that if you hold on to something long enough that you won't win. Right? So a couple other interesting things was this one right here. Like really, if you look, even all the other times in history where you did have some form of a recession to aspect, it still didn't drop. It was really only this time right here that we had massive drops. So there's a good chance from everything that we're still just going to stay around this area. Right? He was not feeling like we're going to have a massive drop and hit a negative 12%. Like it just doesn't seem realistic with patterns of where things are at.
Well, I think the only reason why we dropped was because the financial systems were doing shoddy loans.
Correct. Yeah. When your dog can get a loan, it's an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and when the button,
yeah,
we saw it.
Correct. So that's where it's like overall that like we should just be seeing, okay, great, we slowed down a little bit. What does it look like? All of that, right? All right, I'm skipping through a few. This one was interesting. This is agent count, right? So they're still projecting that agent count will still be a little higher because it's just been growing over the past couple of years still. Pretty interesting, but deal, was this the next one? Inventory?
That one, the agent count. What he was saying is it feels like you're doing less because there are more agents.
Yes.
But we're still doing more than we've ever done.
Correct.
Ultimately, you just have to make sure you're maintaining your market share.
Yep. Yeah, so maintain your market share because the reality is even though there's been more agents with less deals, it feels like there's less. But then what was the stat? Wasn't it like 60%-ish of agents aren't even doing any deals?
I've seen sort of 70, 80%.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Rollin was in one of the classes, and with Jason Abrams while they're talking about another one of the classes that we're excited to launch here. Will be really fun. He was saying that basically the benchmark for being a standard good agent is 9 deals. So, and he said that that's still like top 5% do 9 deals and how that's kind of sad, right? So we're kind of going through a few of those kind of things, but really fascinating on total market volume. That's the thing is I love it because like a lot of you in this room have done a lot more than 9 or on your track to do a lot more than 9. So, mortgage rates, same kind of a concept. They're projecting it to be slightly lower. They're not projecting it to be anything drastic. And I'll go through, there's one slide that I thought was really fascinating of them around this conversation. This one was really interesting. So this one, you have 48.5% of mortgage rates have rates 4% or higher now. So we've gotten to the point where if you look at the last couple of years of this conversation of where interest rates went higher, it was so high on, okay, people who have mortgages had such low rates that it was hard to say, hey, I want to trade. But we're starting to get to the point where there's less and less because it started to be sold, started to be traded. Like that conversation is getting less and less. And I feel like amongst you guys, I'm not seeing that conversation as much either of the 2% interest rates as often, right? And then he brought up another one, which I can't remember the exact number because it's not on here, but he was talking about how many properties still don't even have a mortgage. And it was still a very high number. Do you remember anyone? It was something close. That was it.
But
Then there,
50.
yep. So really interesting in that way. Affordability. This is pretty cool. So if you look, 25, we officially got more affordable by 2%. And that's going to be a lot just due to inflation. That's going to be due a little bit to interest rates, a few of those things. But this is another one of the slides. He said, stop crying. Because he was just like, he's like, this is great. He's like, just because your 10-year scope has been, hey, for the last 10 years, it's now so expensive. But he's like, reality is we're not that far off from a norm over history of buying something. So, okay, so this is a whole bunch of other data. GDP was 2.2. Unemployment was 4.2. He was talking about how, once we get up a little higher is when then we'll probably really see different things with interest rates and stuff like that. One slide that I want to get on with unemployment is coming up soon. This one. Job openings. So if you look at unemployed people versus job openings is back to a spot where there's now more unemployed people than job openings available. So we've crossed that threshold again.
There's more unemployed than jobs.
Correct. There's more unemployed than jobs. So, historically, this is the one that I liked. This one was really fascinating to me. I think this one was an interesting one. They were showing, okay, usually every year there's a certain amount of jobs created. So that's this on this side over here. Okay, you see the green of jobs created. The most interesting part is there's the 10-year average of what's created. And all of these jobs like trade, transportation, government, professional business services, manufacturing, information, all usually have an increase in jobs, where last year they all had negatives in almost like the same degree of what they normally grow. So that's pretty fascinating. If it wasn't for healthcare in having more jobs, they would have said that this number would have been a very negative number overall, but it was really interesting in my opinion, because it's just fascinating to see. Even like mining and logging, which usually for the last 10 years has been actually going negative on jobs, had an increase last year. So, pretty fascinating. Wealth. The top 1% have been going up on their wealth. The 9%, 40%, and bottom 50. Basically, the richer are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, is what this slide was talking about, which was really fascinating. Gary Keller used to explain this as we're into the K effect. So it's going to, like, the richer are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. It's the K effect, and it's very much happening right now. And he said it's also just because they own stuff and it grew. He's like, when you own more properties, you get more value. Like, right? And so he was just talking about that kind of an aspect. The income side was fascinating. This one was really interesting. So these numbers are balanced with inflation. So all the numbers that are shown on here are put to today's dollars, not the past dollars. So baby boomers, Gen X, and millennial, right? The total assets, of course, it's changed depending on how inflation's worked, right? Those were the numbers when they were 30. Right? Average debt, those are the numbers when they were 30. Average monthly debt, or mortgage debt, average net worth, and the median, which is really fascinating because there's all the people right now who love to talk about woe is me or woe is the younger generation in certain ways. And I thought this was a very interesting chart to show in some ways how similar it still is. Of course there's differences. Of course there's different things. The big part that they mentioned on here was that the debt has gone up. people are making more money and having more assets overall, but also the debt has gone up. And that was one of the things, I think, not in inflation. It's coming up. It's on one of the slides. It will show school debt. And school debt is really the one spot that he said that is showing this in the most drastic of ways, which is pretty interesting. But they also have a lot more assets than so kind of interesting. I loved this one because he just was like, I felt like he just felt like he needed to clear it up, which was interesting. He's like, all right, you have this person right here. It's all done though. However, the votes are done by the board. So he's like, even if this person gets replaced, that's only one of the 16 12 votes. One of the 12 votes. He's like, there's not going to be that much of a change just by one person being changed out, was his whole concept and theory. He's like, it will change it and affect it. Robert?
But my question would be then, why, if Trump appointed the current Fed chair,
Mm-hmm.
he's saying, oh, the current Fed chair isn't doing what he's supposed to do, then why is there such a political, like, what would be the gamesmanship if he
Yeah.
doesn't have the influence that Trump says he does? Why wouldn't Trump go a different route? Like, I still don't quite understand. I have a feeling that he's the tiebreaker vote, right? So appointed by
Correct.
the president is the 7 Fed governors, and then you have some dissension in there. He'd be the tiebreaker vote, essentially, is how it would go. But
Yeah, which I think does give you that, it gives you that ability and that little bit of extra power for sure. But I thought it was interesting that he was like, it's not as drastic of a impact as I think people kind of think. And I don't understand it enough. This is not my specialty, but I thought that was a very interesting kind of insight that I was like, I haven't thought of that.
yeah, the chief economist for Zions Bank, he plotted like all the different Fed governors, like where they land on the different opinions and things like that, and they're all over the place. Like
Yeah.
all the Fed governors, like there is no consensus for the Fed governors at all. So I wonder if there's no consensus whatsoever,
Then the one person might have even more power.
One person might have more influence over the rest of them. I don't know.
That was gonna be my comment. I think he wants to replace someone that might have more influence over them to help them sway their vote his way versus more of a voting.
Yeah, the leader of it
Totally.
will have a better influence.
100%. Always. So it does create a difference. But I just thought that's where I thought it was fascinating because I feel like I always hear people being like, right when that happens, all of this will change, kind of a concept. Like that's where I thought it was interesting because it's like I feel like it's been so like drastic of this is the one thing that if it happens, everything else will be different, right? That was
That's happening. They know who it's going to be, and they know the way he votes, and everybody else is split.
right.
So it's like,
So
it's not going to see that big of a difference.
Yep.
In reality, it's just headlines.
which headlines do? Yay! So, but this is one of the slides that I thought was interesting, right? Because I know last year when he was talking a lot about tariffs are a little bit in here too, but it was just like interesting to see the hit like from that kind of a scale of insight of what their thoughts and thinking are. So, it follows a pattern is ultimately part of the thing, right? It's not in controlling. If the Fed rate drops, it's not controlling the interest rate. At the same time, it does relate, right? Which we all know. We've talked about it before. This is fascinating. Customer sentiment. So this is going through and saying, hey, how are people feeling about the market? And we're starting to go back up, right? If you look, it's kind of been like a little all over the place, but we're still in a lower spot, which I think when we were having conversations, that's the conversations we're feeling with our buyers and sellers. 17%, right? Kind of interesting. Like it definitely, you kind of have that when the question of, is it a good time to buy, right? People are having that low feeling.
Well, then,
Yeah.
that is a good time to buy, and you say, well, yes, without any data behind you to back up, historically, real estate is going to
Correct.
always appreciate, and here's the last 822 years to prove that.
822 years.
Like, yeah, it's a great time to buy. Okay, thanks, Captain Obvious. You sell houses for a living. That's
Right.
your answer. So without
Yep.
having these back that sentiment up.
100%. And asking the right questions to understand what they're really going for, right? But
Look at April 2020, 71.8% versus today, or lower sentiment today than in April of 2020.
Yep.
Right? I don't even know how to wrap my head.
Well, that's one of the things that he did was, again, saying stop whining, right? Because he's like, man, you guys were whining to me when it was like everyone wanted to buy, and it was, you had 72 offers and had to, I sold my house in 13 seconds. He's like, boo hoo. Now it's taking 90 days and we're not even quite to like what it was this time, and now you're still whining to me. That it's just funny, but.
And that's again the bigger picture rather than those 4 years and compare it to these 4 years. You have to look at the whole thing.
Correct.
See the
And that was his big part, because like ours and buyers and sellers sentiment is like they can't really see past 10 years, was what he was talking about multiple times. So how do you bring it up? How do you use this data to have good conversations and good questions around it to make sure people are informed and doing that right thing, right? Okay. A lot of this was interesting, but tariffs, he just was kind of saying, they rose, they fell, like everything. Labor markets weakened. The AI, he's like, they've now called into question of, okay, raising $394 billion invested, like having some things and math on profitability on data centers, kind of an interesting aspect there. Inflation, tariffs have put upward pressure on prices. If they escalate, it could create additional inflation. Kind of an interesting aspect there. And then there's just still wars and stuff. He didn't really spend a whole lot of time on any of these. He did go here, which was fascinating because he's like, I've had people now come up and tell me that tariffs were going to solve everything, and that, income tax would go away. And he's like, yeah, no.
Just ruled the tariffs were not legal.
Yeah, so we'll see. Right? So
It's not even
kind of fascinating. It'll be interesting to see kind of where, what, and how, but Rollins alive!
If you all nighter.
So funny. Okay, a few other things. So this is the interesting one. Sides per agent is just right around that 5. They're imagining it's going to go up to 6 for the end of this year. Per agent, of course, we all know that's skewed, right? 80-20 rule. 20% of agents close 80% of the deals. 80% of the agents close 20% of the deals. Right? Pretty fascinating. So, but that is one of those aspects where we do feel like this is tighter. Then this is where his comment came in of like, stop crying. He said, hey, but the volume is still 3 million per agent on average. He's like, you're still making more money than you've ever made as a group. So he was just like, go make as much as you want, but it's your opportunity to kind of get out there and close deals, which is pretty awesome. Listings with price drops has actually, you can see it's been roughly in that 28% for the last while. So not anything too drastic. December had a pretty good of less of price drops. New listings, kind of going through just how many new listings have come up, which is pretty interesting. Distressed sales, he's like, it's still, all the people are saying that foreclosures are going to be like 1 million times any second. He's like, it still just hasn't happened.
One thing about this in Washington County, there was like, everyone touts like, oh, the number of defaults is way up, because there might have been like 3 last year and now there's 8 or whatever. were so like, oh, it's up 100% or whatever. And so people on the,
News
stuff.
loves.
But then you looked at how many actually were foreclosed on, and there was like total of like 27 or something.
Oh,
Yeah, all Washington County.
Yeah,
The year.
for the year. Yeah, there's not that much that's been happening. There's enough solutions and there's enough low interest rates and enough equity that people don't necessarily have to go that route.
So if people are telling you that, oh, the number of defaults is way up from where it was last year, you're right. They have certainly gone up and people have been late on payments or whatever, but there's a lot of solutions where if you look at the macro or, our general area, there hasn't been really any foreclosures.
It's true. And that was kind of his point everywhere too, which was really fascinating. So, underwater homes, he's like, there's just not that many homes that are really underwater, right? Pretty interesting there. Credit conditioning, like still pretty good. New home starts. He made a good comment on this one. He's like, we're still not building enough houses. He's like, we're still underbuilt as the US. So he's like, we're still just kind of in that spot, which is really fascinating. This is that one that we were talking about, debt. The debt amount for student loans is higher and it just keeps on going up. That's probably the biggest thing that's changed. And then consumer debt still's up as well. So, home insurance has gone up, and he's like, that's because there are a lot more things that happen in the world, so he's like, that's just pretty understanding.
Make that much money.
Exactly.
They make money,
We're-
but not that much.
That much more. He did say that. It was great.
It's just what people think about us.
Right. Which is pretty fascinating. Generational wealth. This is a fascinating one. So he said 73% of people over 55 say they want to give up all or some of their estate to their children before they die. And on average, they want to give away 30% while they're still alive. So I know even your comment during the broker moment was how many people are in trusts and having it be where it's like, there's a lot of people here who own real estate who are older, right? So where, what, and how? Because the crazy part is boomers control 85 trillion in assets, which is almost 50% of all assets in the US. So he was saying how much of that is going to slowly be transitioning over the next bit over time. He also said that Jason Abrams had a comment about how that is completely understandable because they've been around the longest and they've now built their assets up. He's like, this is not the crazy part. This number is not anything crazy of having 50% of the wealth be at the higher generation, because that's what's going to happen naturally as we get older and we all are working towards that. That's just not, which I thought was really fascinating.
One thing about this too is as agents, we need to make sure that we help our clients understand that God had 2 clients in the last month that were going to gift their homes to their kids before they die. They could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars
Correct.
in taxes. So you need to make sure that they know, like, hey, talk to your accountant, because that is not the right thing to do. You can do that same stuff in a trust or do things how you want, but if they just gift it to them,
Then you
they
have
just have no.
Step up. You gotta wait till you die.
You're just gonna
Yep.
hammer
That-
and tap.
and that's where 100%, which is really fascinating.
Educating them to just say, hey, seek some advice from an accountant. That's probably not the right thing you should do.
Correct. Yep. And one interesting thing is it's about 25% of all of the assets are in real estate, which is really fascinating. Okay, luxury. Really, there wasn't actually not that much that was interesting. This one was fascinating. Real estate overall has still just been sitting around 15 to 19% as people's total assets of the wealthy. So when you look at the wealthy, what that looks like. Luxury days on market is still not very high. So there's not that much of a change in that way when you look at it as a nation scale. Luxury. It's different everywhere. It's whatever's classified as luxury in each area. Yep. So, because we do have, I mean, here in Washington County, we count a luxury deal as $1 million plus. That's what KW ranks as a luxury deal, right? So they're doing that same kind of concept everywhere, which is pretty cool. Price drops. Fascinating part is luxury listings are having less, luxury listings with at least one price drop is less. So those are still holding strong in that way, which is fascinating. Commercial trends. I thought this was really interesting. Vacancies for offices hit a record of 20.5% last year. So offices are probably one of the ones that are struggling the most, with delinquency climbed to 12.3%, which is the highest since 2000, right? Retail is continuing to shift, in that aspect. Vacancy held about 10.3, which is slightly above pre-pandemic levels. Multi-level fell 1% in 2025, so rents did. So if you notice, like rents, I think a lot of rents have still been softening over the last little bit. And vacancy hovered around 6.3%, which is the highest it's been. So, industrial, I thought that was fascinating, was, they are flight to quality. So we're seeing a lot more people leave places that are B and C and going to A.
St. George. I think vacancy in St. George is like less than 1% for
I
industrial.
believe that.
Yeah.
Isn't that one where he said this is the opportunity for us?
Yeah.
It was on industrial.
Yeah, he was saying honestly, in some ways, all of it. But I do think I think he was going kind of saying, hey, there's a lot of, like, right now is a good time because he does foresee that commercial will shift back up to a better spot again, right? Which is pretty fascinating. But yeah, I think he said the comment at the end of it, so I'm not 100% sure how he directed it, but I took it as a generalized, like, if you're going to be buying some more commercial, like right now you're going to be able to be buying it at a lower point because of how they do numbers. They do numbers off of the percents, vacancy rates, how much money is it pulling in, which is going to make it so that you can have buy an asset for a better price right now than when that changes. Kind of interesting. Multifamily units started is still up there, and he was saying that was one thing that they've built in apartments is why he thinks that rates fell a little bit. Is they did a little bit too much of building apartment complexes over the last couple of years, which I know if you talk to certain people and it still doesn't feel like it's quite there. Like we're not where we need to be completely, but it's definitely got a little bit in that way. Delinquency rates are still so low, right? Like people have kept on saying, oh, hey, in commercial with all the 5 years and 10 years and new interest rates and stuff going to be put into play, that there'd be a lot of delinquents and like foreclosures. Still just hasn't happened. Banks turned around and worked something out. Is kind of what it feels like it's happened. These ones were fascinating. So he kind of was like, okay, Compass and Anywhere merger. Who in here knows about the Compass Anywhere merger? Okay, right. Ultimately, it sounds like there's still some scrutiny going on with it, but he was kind of just like, who cares?
Pretty much he said all four of those, I don't care.
He did, which was awesome.
Kind of funny, I mean, he's the godfather of real estate, right?
Yeah, he like threw in his couple nuggets, right? But then he was just like, I don't care. He's like, there's really nothing.
The Stone Point thing, too, where it's like, we did the Stone Point thing. Who cares what anyone else is doing?
Right, because there's so much happening on the Stone Point capital level from a Keller Williams standpoint, which is really cool. But that's where he was going in here with, okay, Compass and Anywhere. I mean, ultimately now, if you look at Compass with that, it's the biggest organization of a bunch of brands put together, right? But he just was kind of like, we'll see what happens with that. Redfin acquisition, he's like, great, they did that, but they also have the worst interest rates right now. So he's kind of just like, it's what it is. Highest Rocket Mortgage, yep. Private listing battle. he was just like, go out there, and he's like, that could be a spot that you're getting more lawsuits if you don't do that right and disclose properly, was his biggest thing with that. He's like, just make sure that you're still disclosing and giving people the right options, right? So that they're aware of what's happening. And then nothing really there either. It's kind of interesting. But I thought these were really fascinating. So these are all the National Association of Realtors. He made the joke that they're still alive. So he's like, they're still there. But what was fascinating with this is, okay, first-time home buyers have dropped, so 21%. He then said, here's the primary reason, and he laughed. He's like, the primary reason why there's 20% first-time home buyers is because there's 20% who wanted to buy, which is pretty funny. So, but he said, okay, where, what, and how. One of the things I love about this, so if you want to look at this one, if you're thinking, hey, I need to make more social content and add value, because a lot of the people up there were saying like, a lot of social media content is just kind of like repeats of what's out there and, different things. He said, if you want to have some good content about like helping people, he said, look at any of these and do a conversation on social about those. One of the people who talked at the social media con said to always start your video like talking to the person that would be fit that, right? So desire to be closer to family. So if I had a whole script about that, and I know like I was chatting with someone like Scott, and I was like, hey, he wants to move closer to his family, I could then do my whole video of, hey, Scott, and then of course you crop out, hey, Scott. But she said that just by having it where you're talking to the camera as if it's somebody that you care about and want to have that information for, what changes a lot of the dynamic of the video, which I thought was really interesting. But I like this because if you're like, hey, if these are the reasons why people are purchasing a home, if you do a video about 3 tips, if with family, has your family situation changed? Whatever it is, right? Great video content for that. Here. So if you're wanting, that's why I liked that one. It was a really good comment from Jason Abrams. He's like, here you go. You now have this many weeks of content that you could go create. And if you wanted to do it in different ways, right? You still want that, Nina? Okay. Weeks in a home search. Still just about 10. Right? It's been that for a while. Like that's how long people are when they say they want to buy to when they buy is it's an average of 10. So pretty interesting there. This was another one. So if you want to do more video content, actually not this one. This is okay, like first steps in buying a home where they actually found stuff. The fascinating part with this one is Gary Keller was like, looking online for properties should almost be like the number one for anyone. He's like, that's just kind of where everything is. But the reality, which is cool, is people still have their relationships with their agents. They still have relationships with, their friends and relatives. He's like, that's still going to be up there. He's like that, even though like we have all this stuff that we should be doing on social and we need to do a better job, the relationship is also going to be very important, right? Informational sources buyers use. Fascinating. Still people use real estate agents for their information, right? I do think the more you can get that content out there, the more that puts you in that spot, but that's pretty fascinating. One of the things that I'm trying to remember, I think it was Gary Vee who said it. He said, even if you're a new agent, just know that you're a new agent, because the reality is if you're going to be there to hustle and build that relationship and do that for your people, the whole time, most likely people are using ChatGPT to answer their own questions first anyways. So like you're going to be there as that tool to more help them, guide them, and be there for different reasons. And those reasons are going to be changing more and more over time. Where people found the home, internet. Valued features. I thought this was super interesting. It's still going to be photos is number 2 up there with 94%. They actually, one thing that was really interesting, because if you look at social media and all the social media ones that we were at, we're talking about how important video is for what you're doing. The fascinating part is that is what social needs, But on your website, people want to take their own time still. They want to click through the photos at their own pace. They don't want to be like, oh, look, I watched this reel in 10 seconds or hey, I walked through nice and slow and right? They want to go through at their own pace. So photos still were something that were standing out is one of those things that are huge. Method of purchasing a house, still very much use the agents. Pretty interesting, 88%, right? So if you look at all the deals, make sure you're there, make sure you're building those relationships. What buyers want? They still want you to find the right house. They want you to help negotiate. They want to help with paperwork. These things are still very much stayed the same. How buyers found their agent, right? Referring is still number one.
Look at that, the difference between referred and then used previously. That's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge gap.
And that is a huge gap. And the interesting part with that is that's where we talked last week when I talked about the 36 touch as a group, how much we're not doing of staying in touch with our own people at a high enough level. Because even though it's like it was like 90% of people when they close a deal say that they were satisfied and that they would use their agent again, and yet it's 15% due, right?
Only 22% of buyers were first-time buyers. So hypothetically, 78% of buyers knew an agent already.
Yeah. Super interesting. Interviews. I know the crazy part is this hasn't changed much. I know I still use a screenshot from the MREA whenever I'm teaching this topic. The reality is, look, 74% only interview one, 16% only interview two. If you're not first or second, you're not in the game. Financing. Is real estate a good financial investment? As of last year, people still 97% say yes. Right? Is real estate better than investing in stocks? Still 44% say that it is, and 38% say it's about as good. Only 18% say it's not as good. Kind of interesting. Buyer repeats and referrals. You can see it's still, they say definitely that they'd use them and they'd probably use them. Really interesting. 91% say that they would still use them. Buyers and seller satisfaction. People are still, we're doing a good job with serving people, right? Overall, that's what that shows. There's still just 2% that were very dissatisfied, 3% that on seller side. Same thing. A lot of this is very similar. You'll notice sellers is slightly higher, but not by much. What sellers want from their agents. It's a lot of kind of what we talk about. This also can make great content. If you want to make a good social post about helping a seller market their home and do like, hey, here's the, couple things that you should be doing for that. Boom. You've now caught 19% of people potentially of who are in that spot and thinking about it. So using these as your ideas for, hey, how are you out there and doing that social media and having that conversations about it, right? Most important factor is reputation. I know a lot of times, I joke with Scott how we need to play nice in the sandbox, right? Reputation works not only amongst us as real estate agents, but it also very much works as us with the people that, that we have relationships with. Still 87% would reuse them, right? Kind of fascinating. Methods to sell their home using still very much. 91% are using an agent or broker. Incentives offered, none to attract buyers, 73% of houses, right? Assist with closing costs, home warranty, that's started with the conversation. This is not necessarily, this is attracting buyers, not saying this right here is what giving it, right? It's not saying that only 11% assisted with closing costs. That's not accurate.
You're saying, Mark.
Correct. Yep. And that's it. Ultimately, I mean, there's a handful of things. I'm excited. So next week we're going to have a panel of some people who are able to make it to family reunion, going through kind of not only what they learned, but in a lot of the other aspects. And then we'll talk and bring in more of like social media and everything. But I felt like this right here is just some good, solid information. And there's a couple points that I felt like I could tie in easily with the data, for you guys to go not only be able to do more, but be better, be more informed for your clients, right? And make sure that you're in that right spot. So, and that's it. And I know we already